So, I'm going to move on to part 2 now, which is actually looking at what Android Studio has created for us. So, good start. So, I want everyone to just go to Res, this folder here called Res, then this folder here called Layout, and this bit here says Activity Main. It should already be open right here. Hi guys. So, let's have a look at what we've got here. Now, a lot of you may be seeing here where I have this saying constraint layout. It may be saying relative layout. All you need to do is right-click on that bit and go down to the bit that says convert to constraint layout. Yep.
So why might it say relative layout instead of constraint layout?
So relative layout is the default, I think. I've set some setting somewhere at some point. I couldn't tell you where that setting is, but that causes it to go to the constraint layout for me. But if you've installed Android Studio, I think by default it goes to relative layout. The benefit of having something like a constraint layout, as we're going to see in just a second, is that it's very intuitive to use to pick up as a beginner. I like it a lot because it allows you to just drag things and drop things and connect them up. And it's a very visual way of getting started. Okay.
So to come on from earlier, what is the benefit of a relative layout then?
If you're working with a relative layout, I think I don't use it very much. Like I said, I'm a beginner, but I think what it means is if you click on this text bit, you get the code that's generated from the stuff that we're dragging and dropping. And I think if you're working with a relative layout, it's easier to work with the code. Some people prefer to do it that way. Yeah, Henry can probably answer that better than I can. So, what you can see is you should all have a text box in the middle. Everyone got that? And you can probably see that if you hover over it, we have these little circles, yeah? And if you hover over the circles, they go red. Basically, these are the constraints. So if I click on that, it's getting rid of the constraints. And you can see it's kind of like attaching a spring to each side, which I think is why they made the little animation a spring. But the way that we sort of drag and drop things in this scenario is by, so when you just get rid of this, your text views, your widgets, everything you're going to be dragging and dropping and using will be over here. You can drag them and drop them like that. And when you do your constraints, you'll hover over these little circles, they'll go green, you can click and drag and position them as such. Is everyone able to do that? So we've got a text view there. I'm actually going to drag a couple of these bits in, so I'm going to put in a button. It's a good idea if everyone does this as well. And what you can do is not only can you drag these to the top, you can also drag them to the top and bottom of other things on the screen. So for instance there, I'm putting it underneath the text view and on both sides. I'm just going to scroll down here as well to this thing that says plain text. Drag and drop that and put them at the bottom. And you can see all the widgets are appearing at the side. You might have noticed that there is a difference between this text box here and this text box here. The difference between these two text boxes is that the bottom one is what we call an edit text. It allows a user to input text. So this is something you'd use for someone entering their name or a text message or something like that. Whereas the top one, you can't edit as a user of the app. This is something that we'll put information into. Or load information into. What you also might have noticed is this bar at the side with a lot of things going on. The first thing at the top is we have what's called an ID. It allows you to identify different views that you've got. So we'll be using that later. For the moment, we're just going to leave the IDs at the defaults. But if you're using a big app which has lots of edit text, for example, then you'll want to call them specific things so you know what edit text you're dealing with. We also have this here. Now, this loosely represents the box being each view that you've clicked on, and these things at the side being constraints. And what you can see here, if we hover over, they say right margin, left margin, etc. You can see there's a little gap between where we've got a straight line here and a wiggly line. Can you guys see that? See that all right? Basically, what it means is that there'll be a margin between where you've actually constrained the thing to and where the thing is actually going to go up until. Now, it doesn't really make much difference when you've got something like an edit text here or a button because they aren't very big. But if you have an image which is expanding to fill the full size and you have a margin set to the side, then you will see a white gap down the side. And for the purposes of now, I'm just going to set this to 0. It's fun. Also, we've got these bits here. It says wrap content. You can click on it and it changes. It's good fun. These bits affect how your widgets expand and fill the size. So you can see here, this is currently on the setting, match constraints, and you can see that's expanding to fill a very disproportionate size for a button. I'm going to set it back to this because it looks best. I could go on and on about what each of these bits are doing, but it's probably best for you guys to just like play in your own time and find out on your journey of discovery. The last thing that I'm going to mention in this properties bar are these little circles here, which basically tell you, so say I have this button, and I've constrained it to go underneath the text view and above this bit, but I actually think I want it to be closer to the text view, I want to shift it up a bit. What you can do is just click this circle and drag it up, and you can see that it does that. It's kind of a percentage thing. Usually, I mean, I haven't used this very much, but you might find that you do. So yeah. So this is where you're going to put everything related to your app, which should be staying roughly the same. You can actually edit the way that things look from this Java code here, which we're going to come to in a second. But the stuff that you do in the Java code is more related to the responsiveness of the app. So when things change, depending on user input, if you click a button, something different happens. That's all done with the Java, whereas the stuff that will stay the same throughout the most of the time will be put here as a general rule. Now, we're going to go on to have a look at that Java in just a second. I just want to mention a couple of things before we go on to do that. The first thing is, can everyone see this manifests folder and this Androidmanifest.xml file? If you double click that, you should get something like this. So the Android manifest, we're not going to go into much detail about it. It's automatically generated, so for the most part, you don't need to worry about it. Basically, it contains some general information about your app. So you can see here, next to this line, Android icon. There's this little icon here displayed handily. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what that means? Yeah, so this is just a little visualization that Android Studio is loading up of the icon that it's referencing here. This is basically the icon which, when you open up your home screen on your Android phone, it will show for that app. You can change that later, but we're not going to go into that. One other thing, the reason I point this out is because this is quite important when you come to permissions. So anyone who's used an Android app before will know that sometimes you open up an app and it will say, do you want to let this app use your location, or use Bluetooth, or store files, or access the camera? This is all controlled by permissions. And the reason that it asks you when you first open the app is because they will have put the permissions here. If you're ever working with stuff, you'll probably see on developer.android.com or on Stack Overflow how to put those permissions in, so we're not going to deal with that right now. But it's worth knowing that that's where it goes. Yes?
It's also worth pointing out that permissions have changed in the newer versions of Android, and that it no longer asks at the start, it asks when it needs them.
Yes. Yes. That's if you're using, the most up-to-date Android versions. The last thing I'm going to mention before we move on to part 3 is this thing here called Gradle Scripts. Now, who here was at the Hackers at Cambridge Gradle workshop? Yeah, demonstrate. Don't worry. That was one of our non-beginners workshops. So I wouldn't expect any of you to know about Gradle at this point. Basically, as you've probably seen, we have lots of different parts of the app all over the place. So we've got this manifest, and we've got some Java code, and we've got the activity main XML. And as you create more activities, there'll be more activities all over the place. And what Gradle does is it builds your project. So it puts everything together and allows you to run. And I think that's probably a good explanation for the moment.
Yeah, that's a good explanation.
And there's a lot of different things that you can open up and have a look at, and they're scary bits of code, but you really don't need to worry about that. It's, for the most part, automatically generated.